Well, thank you for having me here today. As stated, I work for the Career Center. If you're not familiar with us, we do have a team that's specifically for graduate students at the Career Center. My associate director, Marilyn Yeager, you may have met, and then there's myself, and we're also hopefully going to have a graduate assistant here fairly soon. But we do work with master's and doctoral students. Just for kind of a show of hands, so I know who's all here. Who all here is a master's student? Okay, great. Who's a doctoral student? All right. Any postdocs? Okay. And do we have any 3+2 students here? Okay, and a couple 3+2 students. All right. So this presentation should hopefully speak to everybody here who's in the room. To give you a little overview, we do have some learning outcomes that we want to focus on today, kind of a little bit of a schedule. First, I want to talk about timelines and on-campus recruiting. So you're going to learn about typical timelines employers use for internship recruiting. We're also going to talk about what employers are looking for. So even when it comes to an internship, you really want to have an understanding of what is the role, how do you fit within that particular role. We're going to talk about resume construction. It's not going to be a super deep dive into resumes today because that's something I could literally talk probably for 2 hours on. So we're going to at least get an overview of resumes and some of the language in those resumes that may resonate with you. And we're going to end things today a little bit with networking and how you can leverage networking when it comes to your internship search. I want to start by talking about on-campus internship searching. And we do have a number of career fairs that are going to be popping up here in the spring. This isn't the exhaustive list. There's still going to be additional career fairs that are going to be added, but you can find these career fairs by going to careercenter.tamu, go to the events and programs tab, and then click on the career fairs tab. So being stats students, I wouldn't just necessarily focus on the engineering career fair. That seems kind of intuitive, maybe being stats students, but I would definitely check out the arts and sciences career fair, the business career fair, even the sales career fair. There's going to be a lot of opportunities there for people who are looking for folks that have your particular skill sets, depending on how you've kind of done your degree program or the different experiences that you've had as students going throughout your different experiences. So I do want to talk about on-campus recruiting timelines because this is a big question that often I get from students is like, when should I be looking for an internship, or even when should I be looking for a permanent job? We can think about recruiting when it comes for internships kind of falling into two buckets. One's going to be what we call on-campus recruiting. That is career fairs, information nights, going on Hire Aggies and finding particular positions on there. And then we can kind of think of like non-on-campus recruiting. That's something, a job you may find on a website like Indeed.com. So those recruiters may not necessarily be active, particularly on a career campus. But for right now, we're going to talk about on-campus recruiting and kind of the timelines that go with that. It's usually a much wider timeline for internships than you may encounter for permanent full-time positions. This would be one example. And I want you to really be thinking about your strategy with where you are in your degree program or your postdoc experience, or wherever you're kind of within your career, and when you want to do those applications. So a lot of times you'll have recruiters show up on campus in the fall. They'll be sourcing candidates. When I say source candidates, collecting resumes, seeing who might, at least on paper, be a good fit for the job requisitions that they're looking to fill. And then they may actually do the interviews in the spring with the idea that you're going to be completing your internship within the summer. So that's kind of a wide timeline, as you can see. That's kind of like a 9-month, maybe even 10, 11-month timeline. Now, this would be a second example. We're coming into spring semester, right? So we might have employers that are coming to career fair or doing information nights or posting on Hire Aggies, sourcing candidates in the early spring with the idea they're going to do interviews in the late spring to eventually have those internships starting within the summer. Now, I don't want you to think that the only internships are in the summer. There are internships that happen in the fall and in the spring as well. You may hear two words get used often. One might be internship, like we're using here. The other one might be co-op or cooperative education opportunity. Sometimes those words are used interchangeably, but you can generally think of an internship as usually going to be a part-time experience, like 15 to 20 hours, for example, whereas a co-op a lot of times is going to be a full-time, non-permanent training experience. Co-ops, not always, but 9 times out of 10, they're probably going to be done during the summer, whereas internships, you might have those fall, spring, summer, whenever. A lot of employers, your larger ones, have very formalized internship programs. So like a Fortune 500, Fortune 100 company, they're going to have very formalized internship programs with their sourcing, with how long those internships are. Um, they've usually made the determination whether or not they're going to hire on CPT at that point in time. Or you may have smaller employers that really don't have a formalized internship program. You usually have a lot more freedom with when you might want to start that. You might, you might even have the ability to make an offer of like what you think a fair pay would be for an internship like that. So just keep in mind, it can be a little bit non-formalized depending on the employer. But it is important that you understand the employer and you understand what market they're in. So we're just going to use an example here. Jordan is at an interview at Aggie Corp, a premier manufacturer of widgets. During the introduction, Jordan is asked a typical interview question: what do you know about our company? So that's a pretty typical question that you may wind up getting. So our first answer, oh, thank you. We just need to go back. One right here. So our first answer, not a bad answer, but you're one of the top widget manufacturers in the world, are known specifically for the product lines of the Good Bull widget and the 12th man widget. Your top values are excellent integrity, leadership, loyalty, respect, and selfless service. So not a terrible answer. Pretty solid answer, I would say. But let's look at the second answer here. You're the top widget producer in North America and climbed from number 3 to number 2 in Europe over the last year. Your top product lines are the Good Bull and the 12th man widgets, which have been responsible for 67% of the market share in the sector. Your top competitor is Bebo widgets, but you've chosen to compete on product quality rather than price, which gives you an edge over Bebo. Culturally, your teams are aligned along the pillars of excellence, integrity, leadership, loyalty, respect, and selfless service. So we've really laid out, hey, we've done this research on you, even though this may not necessarily be related to like data science or actuarial work or whatever data work you're interested in going into. It still shows we understand the market that they're in, what they're all about. So when it comes to determining those research points about employer, what employers are going to be a good fit, what employers are stable, that's going to become much more important, particularly if you're thinking about permanent jobs. And a lot of those employers that have those very formalized internship processes, they're thinking about that as a pipeline into their permanent hires. What employers do and what employers convert interns to full-time. So where you probably want to start when it comes to this internship search, particularly let's say we're going to be going to a career fair, is going to be here at Launch Hire Aggies right on our website. And this is what it looks like, the UI right here. And we can find career fairs under the events tab. We can find information events underneath the events tab. But let's just look here at a position that we may want to research. And this is a position from Eli Lilly and Company right here. So we want to click on that links to learn more about opportunities. And that's going to take us to their website so we can begin doing that research right at that point in time. Oops. And then click on view jobs to see what an employer has posted. So we can often see there and see, well, what are the explicit jobs they actually have posted right there? So don't ignore interesting positions, even if it states that you don't match the selection criteria. A lot of times, if you get that on Hire Aggies, it says, you're not qualified for the job. It's just how the employer coded something within that particular position. So they might have had, bachelor's level there, but your master's level, for example, you're still going to be qualified for the job 9 times out of 10. So look past that thing that shows up on Hire Aggies that says you might not be qualified. But let's take a look here at this Lilly Drug Discovery and Development Graduate Internship. And this is what gets pulled up here. We can find the position types, so we're interested in internships. We can see what level they're looking here. And even if they're not looking for graduate level, look beyond the desired class level, because if it's bachelor's level, it still may be a good fit for you. Be mindful of application dates, and you can apply to a lot of these positions before a career fair even. And then look to see what skills are desired for the position. So these are a little more bench science skills that we're looking at, but depending on your undergraduate degree, you may be combining like a bench science undergraduate degree with a stats graduate degree. So think very broadly depending on what your background and what your skills are. But you also want to be telling your story. And this is going to be incredibly important when it comes time to apply for roles. So throughout your career and educational journey, you've developed a career story. Employers are often interested in two things. What are your skills? And then what are your accomplishments? And you want to combine those two when it comes to your story. We're going to look at some application materials and you'll see how that's done. So skills plus accomplishments. You want to help the employer connect the dots as your unique knowledge, skills, and abilities and other attributes, or what we call KSAs, make you a good fit for the position. And this is why it's really important that you understand the employer and you understand the job description to which you're applying. So we'll take a look here at a couple of resumes. The one that we have pulled up here is going to be for somebody who is hypothetically a master's student. So you want to write with your audience in mind. And that's one thing I look at a lot of resumes. And one thing that's often missing from them is they're just kind of like all this information, but there's really not something instrumental that's in that information. There's really no target that information, just like a kind of like a smorgasbord of different skills and experiences, but there's no career story behind that. So what we have here at the top of this resume is what we often call an executive summary. It's taken the place of what you might have known as an objective. If you're familiar with objectives from earlier resumes, like looking for entry-level position or looking for mid-level position focused on X, Y, and Z. We really don't need that so much when it comes to our resumes. You can include one on your career fair resume, but generally when you're applying online, you might have something like this executive summary. And here's just the basic formula for creating that. Broad title with expertise in, list 3 skills, methodologies, diverse experience and success in, list 2 or 3 roles, industry projects, task done resulting in, accomplishments able to. And we'll see an example of this right here. So this would be an example. Data analyst with proficiency in data processing, pattern recognition, and statistical modeling, varied experience and accomplishments in developing data analysis protocols, pioneered novel data cleansing technique leading to 20% reduction in processing time, proficient in managing multiple projects from day one. You may be thinking about some of your research experiences that you've had up until this point in time. That's really what's going to make probably a lot of your resume at this point, those different research experiences. But you want to be thinking about how is an employer going to value the different experiences that you've had up until this point. And this really helps root and contextualize the rest of the document that you're going to be putting out there. Most likely somewhere on your resume, you're going to have a skills section. I've talked to a bunch of hiring managers. Some like it down at the bottom, some like it more up towards the top. You can't really satisfy everyone. So my main recommendation, if you have a 2-page resume, we're looking at a 1-page resume here, but if you have a 2-page resume, just make sure that it's somewhere on the first page. The idea of the skills section is when somebody picks up the resume, they can get just a quick snapshot of like, here's your areas of expertise, here's your specific competencies. So this would be a skills section, again, for somebody who has a data background. You want to be intentional with these skills as well. You don't want to just put every like little skill under the sun on there. So like if you're trained in CPR, we probably don't need to put CPR, down in the skills section for the types of roles that you're going to be aiming for. But this brings us to our next topic, which are keywords. You might have heard a lot about keywords. Keywords need to be in resume. I would even argue keywords need to be in your interview as well. So they're important because recruiters use them when doing searches inside the applicant tracking system, or ATS, and they show alignment with the job. Now, I do want to take a real quick brief moment here and talk about ATS, because there's kind of a lot of nonsense about ATS that gets thrown around in the public discourse, that they're looking for keywords and they're rejecting your application based upon the keywords that you have on your resume. That's really not how they work. Some do have some really, really basic AI and keyword ranking in them, but I don't know a recruiter that actually uses those. Still, the keywords are important because when you apply to a role, you become part of that database. And even if you don't get the initial job that you apply for, if a new job requisition opens up, a lot of times the recruiters will source from the database that they already have. So you want to make sure that those important keywords that would be done for a Boolean search are still going to pop up. So when directly applying to a position, the job description often signals what keywords are important. And just for an example, for stats students, these might be some keywords for statistics, what we have right up here. This is just kind of a concise version. We could probably fill a whole page on what would be really important keywords, but you want these to be appearing on your resume, but you also want some context with those as well. So you don't want to just simply stuff your resume full of keywords. That's not going to do you any good. You want to make sure also that you can qualify or quantify that skill. So let's say we have a student who's considering putting R programming on their resume as a skill. When you do that, you want to think about, well, what if I wind up in an interview? How can I talk about how I've used this? So we might have some examples here. We're engaging in some what I would call metacognition. Before doing so, the student anticipates interview questions they may get asked regarding the skill. So an example might be, tell me about a time you used R to analyze data that hadn't been cleaned, or on a scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable are you with R programming? So you're not just putting skills on the resume, you're thinking about, well, how have I used those skills? How can I talk about how I've used those skills? And that brings us to what's really going to make up the bulk of your resume, which is your experience or leadership experiences, volunteer experiences, projects. We're going to have bullet points that we use within our different experiences here. So again, these are some examples that we have with respect to our experiences. I want you to think about your bullet points and how they instrumentally fit from kind of 4 job dimensions. There's going to be scope, which you can think of as level of insight over work and employees and purview. There's responsibility, which are the day-to-day duties and general expectations of the role. There's judgment, authority level, and ability to make independent decisions, and impact, influence on potential or meaningful business decisions. And we'll see how this actually kind of plays out with a bullet point or two here in a second. So building a powerful resume bullet point, we're always going to start with an action verb. For positions that you're currently doing, you can use present tense. For positions or projects in the past, you can use past tense with that. And you can find a list of action verbs on the Career Center website. Just go to careercenter.tamu.edu, click on current students, and then click on resume, and you'll find actually a list that you can download there. It's really nice because it will have it by functional area as well, which is super, super cool. Next, we're going to put the duties and tasks. And then we're going to have the task or duty impact. So the why behind what you've done. It's nice if you can quantify some sort of impact, but sometimes you can't do that or do that in a way that really makes sense. So you want to have kind of a qualitative impact or a why behind you did a specific duty. Let's take an example and see how this all kind of plays out. And we're just going to use an example of SAS, right? So a lot of you probably use SAS or have used SAS within your work. So you want to think about, well, what's the level at which you've used SAS? You want to have some specificity with your bullet points. And this is another kind of area I see a lot of times students can use some improvement with their resume. So we have this bullet point here, use SAS to compute statistical tests. somebody reading the resume, that really doesn't give them a whole lot of information. So we want to have some specificity. And we can think about this from a responsibility and an impact level, right? So we can think about, well, what's a basic level of using SAS here? So loaded data from various sources such as spreadsheets, databases, or text files into SAS for further analysis. We can think about this from a middle level too. Program OLS regression in SAS and examine regression coefficients, identifying two significant predictors in direction and strength of their impact on participant satisfaction. Or we can think about this even from an expert level here. Built and applied custom SAS macro to perform longitudinal data analysis, accounting for individual specific variations and repeated measurements over 2 years. So we have our level of responsibility here, right? We're showing, we're kind of showing like what we've actually done, and we have the impact here. We have the why behind that, identifying two significant predictors and direction, accounting for individual specific variations, et cetera, et cetera. But let's think about this from just an impact standpoint. So let's say we're talking about something maybe you've done in your research that the role would have impact for healthcare stakeholders. So how can we show the extent of our impact? We'll discuss who might be affected by our research. So this would be kind of like smaller impact, conducted cluster analysis using SAS to analyze trial data and presented to 7-person research team for grant reporting, which is something you very well may be doing. So there's that why, there's that impact behind it, right? Or we can think about this kind of large scale, right? Discovered novel patient stratification based on exploratory data analysis in SAS, leading to personalized treatment recommendations with potential to affect 2.5 million patients. So the implications, even though we might not at this point be directly affecting 2.5, we do have the implications of, hey, this is the work that I'm doing. This is the level at which it may be affecting somebody. So a couple of things to keep in mind here: be specific and stick with technical skills in the skills section. So communication, that's kind of very broad, right? But if we say scientific communication, that's pretty specific. That's a very specific competency. Things like leadership or organizational skills or critical thinking, save those for the bullet points because you can put context around those and you can qualify them. Use both abbreviations and the full spelling. So like we've talked about exploratory data analysis a couple of times. We want to have both exploratory data analysis, at least the first time we write out, and then put EDA within parentheses. That way, when recruiters are doing those Boolean searches, you're kind of covering both of your bases. Now, there are some things like scuba. You may very well have scuba for some reason on your resume. You don't have to completely spell that out. It's just so, it's just used so many times, people know exactly what it is. And then go beyond the skills section to highlight keywords. Those keywords can find their way into the different bullet points that you've created and that you've put on the resume. Let's take a look here at a doctoral level resume. Again, this is a 2-page one. If you're a master's student, 3+2 student, you very well may have a 2-page resume. There's no hard and fast rules about that. Though again, in the discourse, people like to kind of talk quite a bit about, should it be 1 page, should it be 2 page? You just want to be using space well, and you want to have relevant information on the resume. Now, we have a little bit different of a professional summary here. We did almost like check marks, bullet points right there. Again, it's in how you want to tell your story. And I do want to call a little bit of attention here to the education section. So we're being pretty, I guess you could say, concise. Not as much information on a resume as we would have on a curriculum vitae. If we had curriculum vitae, we'd probably have like our thesis or a dissertation chair, maybe the rest of our committee. Here, we just have name of the university, name of the degree. If there's a specialization or concentration, you can include that. But here we do have some coursework, and if you're looking for internships, coursework can be very helpful because that gives the person, the hiring manager, or the recruiter knowledge about where you are in the program, and it also helps increase that keyword aspect as well. And then we did sort of the same there for our bachelor's degree. Probably later in your career, you're not going to need the coursework on there, but if you're looking for an internship, it can be very helpful. And once again, we have our experience section. we're talking about our research experience here, because that's going to be a lot of your work experience depending on your background. If you're more of a traditional graduate student who came straight into a grad program without working in industry or nonprofit or another area, but we will talk about that here in a second. A couple things I just want to mention, we want to give a little bit of context here. Usually the first bullet point is going to give that context. What's the nature of the research that we're doing? How are we interchanging with people within our research group? So depending on the types of roles that you're thinking about, a lot of times you're going to be reporting out information to other people, stakeholders who might be internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. So to show also those relational aspects of your work, super, super important within your research group. And then again, we're talking about, different things that we've done, how we've used different tech stacks, or how we've used different statistical tests right there. And again, we're being very instrumental with how we're using that. We can include our teaching experience in here as well. Think about your teaching experience. What's going to be important to employer? Well, being able to explain concepts to other people who may not necessarily have a technical background, that's super important. Again, other technical skills that you've used. We can even put in here, we can even talk about revenue generation for being a TA here, because all we got to do to figure out the revenue generation, and full disclosure, I don't know if that number is completely accurate, so I'm talking to stats folks here, so you can do the work, but we can think about what's the in-state tuition for a class that we've TA'd or we've been instructor of record on, and how many students were in that class. I mean, it's not a perfect number because we got to think about in-state versus out-of-state, but we can do the math and we can figure out, well, here's the number of revenue dollars that I impacted by teaching. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you might have other work experiences outside of internship or outside of research. So maybe you did do an internship as an undergrad. We can have a whole other section that has that. We could put this in the experience section too. It doesn't matter. It's all in how we want to tell the story. If we want to highlight this more as an internship experience, but same idea right there. And we might also include course projects that we've done, particularly if those course projects are somehow related to the types of internships that we're aiming for, or if there's specific skills elsewhere in our resume that's important, but maybe are not getting highlighted within those different experiences. And we can have other sections here. We can have honors section. We could have a publications section. I would recommend selected publications if you have a lot of publications. And then again, I would hone those towards some of the types of roles that you may be aiming for. So just real quick, how are we doing on time here? Okay, great. I think we're pretty good here on time. Okay, so reading a job description, I'm showing you an example of a job description right here in Hire Aggies. So there's two types of qualifications that you want to pay attention to, even when it comes to an internship. There's going to be something called basic qualifications or required qualifications. These are usually fairly objective, need to be pursuing degree in statistics, need to have demonstrated experience doing multivariate analysis, need 1 year of experience doing exploratory data analysis. You want to make sure that you're hitting all of those basic qualifications and they are communicated very explicitly on the resume, because if they're not, it's going to be much more difficult to move through that selection and recruiting process. So read that very carefully. So obviously here we have statistics is a requirement here. So this is master's degree in public health, epidemiology, statistics, et cetera, et cetera. So this would be a role most likely that you would want to have your master's degree in, or we have related discipline plus 4 years related experience. So if you have some industry experience before coming into a master's program, you would still meet the basic qualification for this. So if a student's studying for a PhD, they'll meet the 4-year requirement because they have the 4 years related experience. If they're a master's student, think about how can they explain that experience on their resume. And there may be creative ways that that can be done. Preferred qualifications, these are the nice to haves. Obviously, the more you have, the better. The more they're communicated on the resume, the better. But you don't have to hit them all, right, to be qualified for the job. And there's a good chance you're probably not going to hit every single one. That's just kind of the nature of it. Particularly if you're thinking about internship, because you're looking to expand your skill set as an intern. But obviously, the more you have, the better. So we'll say the student has not specifically researched drugs, but they've looked at sensory motor functioning, perhaps in their research. So that's something that they could demonstrate on their resume. Students done statistical modeling in their own research, their PI's research, obviously here. Students solved a major problem with data that was heteroscedastic, an experiment that they had run. So demonstrate ability to quickly recognize problems and results. So we might actually have something like they identified heteroscedasticity within data, and what action was taken with that, or how it had implications. Highly skilled in designing, executing, troubleshooting code in R. So maybe the student's main experiment is in SPSS or SAS for data computation. But again, this isn't required. This is a preferred qualification here. Or maybe the student has some experience in R, but maybe not super, super deep experience in R. I would still say go ahead and apply to this role. Excellent written and oral communication skills required, including track record of success and co-authorship on multiple scientific papers. So the student will have several papers and presentations from their research. Next, let's talk about networking. I do want to advocate that you jump on LinkedIn and go to the Texas A&M alumni page, because it's a really great place to start networking with folks who might be doing jobs that you're interested in or working for employers that you're interested in. So go to Texas A&M's University LinkedIn page, go to the alumni tab, and then you can do a keyword search for contacts. If you're familiar with a concept called informational interviews, or if you're not, it's essentially doing an interview with people who are doing the work that you're interested in. So if you're thinking about different employers you might be interested in working for, that's a really great place to kind of start doing your research. And there's also the Association of Former Students. You can reach out to folks via LinkedIn, and usually it's like a 300-word, connection requests that you can send, but you can send a much longer introduction through the Association of Former Students. So you might have to sign up for it if you don't have an account already, but once you do, you can find a ton of former students on there. I do want to talk about two specific people that we'll call career influencers. These are the folks that most likely you're going to be reaching out to quite a bit on LinkedIn if you're using LinkedIn. And we're going to talk about recruiters who are talent acquisition professionals who source potential candidates, review applications for job fit, build talent pipelines, create strategies to attract talent, and collaborate with hiring managers and human resource business partners to shape internal workforces. And then there's the hiring managers themselves. They're the people that you're most likely going to be reporting to, have a training need, or have a hiring need, identify requirements of the job, make final hiring decisions. And they usually have a pain point. What I mean by pain point is there's something within their team that, they need a problem specifically solved, or, there's work piling up and they need somebody who can handle all that work. Let's talk about recruiters. And we can think about recruiters falling into three particular buckets. We have campus recruiters. Those are the ones coming to career fair. They're the ones with those kind of longer hiring timelines that we talked about. We have what are known as corporate or internal recruiters. They are the types of recruiters that generally you're going to interface with for permanent jobs. They also might be doing some campus early talent recruiting as well, but they work for an employer, one single employer, usually within their human resources function. And then finally, there's agency recruiters. These are independent recruiters that hire on behalf of multiple employers. For internships, you're probably going to mainly be running into campus recruiters and corporate recruiters. You may very rarely run into a type of agency recruiter called an RPO for internships, but for the most part, you're probably not going to be working a lot with agency recruiters for internships. So your top two most likely going to be campus recruiters, corporate recruiters. So recruiters are tasked with finding people for jobs rather than finding jobs for people. So when you're thinking about interacting with recruiters and reaching out to them, say through LinkedIn, think about how can you make their job easier. They want to be building pipelines for talent for their internships. So first, let's identify a recruiter. So we got Lynn Gomez, just the recruiter that I found here on LinkedIn. So look at the job title to get an idea of what types of jobs the person recruits for. So if you're interested in, data jobs, or tech jobs, or research jobs, probably don't want to be reaching out to somebody who's recruiting for medical science liaisons, for example. So you want to identify what particular job functions that they recruit for. So we look at their About section, learn more about their territory and job requisition portfolio. So they are doing or recruiting for software internships. So SWE internships and students and early talent. So this is definitely probably a recruiter that we want to build the relationship with. They're not necessarily recruiting executives. And then we can find out, a lot of information about their employer right here. There's kind of the marketing copy that we can read right there, but that gives us some information about how we want to reach out to this recruiter. So making the initial contact. And it's all right if you sent out a message like this before. I probably sent one out in my history somewhere along the time, but this is not what we want to do. I see you're a recruiter. I'm a statistics graduate student at Texas A&M. I currently have experience with Python, JavaScript, Java, AI, deep learning, kind of this whole like laundry list of different skills. I've attached my resume. Please let me know if you have any data science or machine learning internships I'd be a good fit for. So this is probably not a really great strategy. It's just not helping the recruiter source. They're essentially going to say, thank you for reaching out. Check out our jobs website and see if there's anything that you would be a fit for. So it doesn't help Lynn source you as a candidate. If Lynn has these jobs available, they're all probably already posted. Like I said, Lynn will most likely just direct us to the career page. So let's try this again, but let's make Lynn's job easier. Dear Lynn, I'm a statistics graduate student at Texas A&M University. I focus on deep learning and data engineering. I've been interested in HubSpot's mission to create an ecosystem to help businesses grow with a conscience that aligns with my own personal values. In the near future, will you be filling any internship roles with an emphasis on data engineering or machine learning, or connect me with recruiters who are? So we got a strong introduction. It focuses on Lynn's future pipeline of candidates. So obviously this is a little bit of a long-term strategy. If you're like, I want to find an internship for next semester, this might not be the best approach, but if you have some time, this would be a great approach. Demonstrates research into Lynn's employer. We're not just shooting out messages here. It's obvious that we looked and we know what HubSpot's all about. It doesn't overwhelm them with a laundry list of skills. So this is a great way to reach out. So here's a variation. Dear Lynn, I'm a statistics grad student at Texas A&M University. My focus is on deep learning and data engineering. I've been interested in HubSpot's mission to create an ecosystem to help businesses grow with a conscience, since it aligns with my own personal values. I want to be ready to apply when it comes time for any internship opportunities. Accordingly, would you mind telling me when your next hiring cycle starts, if there are any specific skills you recommend I emphasize on my resume? So it doesn't guarantee that Lynn's going to reach back out, but if Lynn's thinking about their pipeline here, well, we're saying, hey, I want to help you with your pipeline. Oh, by the way, is there anything that you would say that I should emphasize on my resume? So you're kind of getting some insider information. And even when you go through a screening interview with a recruiter, you can always ask, what would you say are the 3 things that I should really emphasize if I get passed along to the hiring manager or the hiring team? Because they know, they've done the strategy intake kind of interview with their hiring manager. So they kind of have an idea. They know kind of what the profile is of that ideal candidate. Recruiters often use LinkedIn Recruiter. This is what the UI looks like here. So a couple things I just want to kind of call attention to. Again, we're not talking really deeply about creating your LinkedIn profile today, but you want to put kind of your aspirational job title within your headline. So a lot of times I'll see something like graduate student at Texas A&M or postdoctoral scholar at Texas A&M, but that doesn't tell anyone who's looking on LinkedIn Recruiter about you. So if your interest is becoming a data scientist, you can say emerging data scientist or data professional or something along those lines, because that's going to increase the time or the amount that they're going to click on your profile if they find you in LinkedIn Recruiter. It also tells them how many company connections that you have. So that's why it's really great to build your network on LinkedIn as well, as they can see that on LinkedIn Recruiter. And then key terms here, much like your resume, you want to have your key terms in your LinkedIn profile as well. So not all recruiters, though, have access to LinkedIn Recruiter, so make yourself easier to discover. Again, there's been a little bit of discourse on like LinkedIn and stuff. There was a former Google recruiter who now works for an agency. It says you look desperate, like by putting this on, and like every other single recruiter has come on and said, no, I like seeing that because I know that you're a warm contact if I reach out to you. So you can put that open to work on there. And all you do for that, that's just an example of mine. Click the open to work. You can include up to 5 job titles, location type, start date, employment type. Obviously, we're talking about internships. We can put internship right there. And then we can put recruiters only or all LinkedIn members. If you're looking for an internship, you might want to put all LinkedIn members. It's a little bit different if you're working permanently and you're looking to make a change of employers. You might not want your entire network to know that. But so finding hiring managers, the magic search key string and LinkedIn, I'm hiring plus job title. So let's talk about messaging the hiring manager. So when applying to a role you found on LinkedIn, you can take the opportunity to message the hiring manager. So you can message either after or before. There's slightly different strategies that come with that. But make sure your profile's up to date, because you're most likely going to click on your profile right when you message them. So you want to have a profile that's pretty well fleshed out. So before we start doing that, we want to make sure that our LinkedIn is up and rolling here. So this is just an example. We're reaching out to King Gill here. They have an actuarial intern position that they are advertising. So ask yourself, what are the most important aspects of the job? And what would, I want to say King, that was something I used there. Sorry about that. Wanting a candidate. So imagine that that's King there. Thought that had been changed, but apparently not. So hello, Gil. I recently applied to the actuarial intern position you discussed on LinkedIn. I'm currently a statistics student at Texas A&M. I've already taken exam P and exam FM, so I believe I could hit the ground running in this role. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So this is after we've already applied for the role. So it touches on the key skills and it shows an understanding of the role. Focuses on solving the hiring manager's need. I believe they could hit the ground running in this role. So they wouldn't need like a ton of training to come in and start having impact. Now, this is if we do this before applying the role. Hi, Gail, I'm interested in the actuarial intern position with my research studying risk and applying statistical models to the concept. I believe I'm a great fit to best communicate how I can fill the position's requirements. Could you share what you see as the central prioritized need of the role? I understand if you can't disclose info until I'm an active applicant. I look forward to applying. So again, we're stating how the candidate could be a good fit for the role. It focuses on the hiring manager's needs to best communicate how I can fulfill the position requirements. Seeks additional information to tailor those application materials. So very similar to Len, how we said, what should I emphasize on my resume? But we're still respecting the application process. There's some hiring managers that feels like you might be trying to come in through the back door if you message them first. But we're saying, hey, I understand I can't jump in line. I still respect the application process here. So you might not be able to reply. I totally understand that. So when to use this strategy, this is probably going to be for a smaller employer or something that's like super niche. So I probably want to do this for like a data scientist role at Meta. But it's really great if you've already built a relationship with that hiring manager, a couple months before, maybe before you even knew that they would have an opening and you had that trust with them. So just Real quick summary, internship is iterative, as we've seen here. It's really about being intentional and looking at what employers are interested in, and then understanding the role of the employer and really building that bridge between ourselves as professionals and the needs, and make a plan. If you just start applying to every position that kind of pops up, you may not get the traction that you're hoping for. So you want to have some intentionality when it comes to your internship search. So with that, that concludes the main content. I think we may have a few minutes here if anyone has any questions. Yeah. So fall semester, um, are you asking to be hired in fall semester or for? Okay, yeah. I mean, for this summer, it's probably already started. Um, the interview process might start in late fall, but like as we talked, it might actually start within the spring as well. It depends on the employer. Those hiring timelines are going to be much longer for those internships. Now, with that said, if you feel like maybe you missed the application pool in the fall, it's still all right because there's going to be employers that are going to be shorter who are going to be sourcing and interviewing within the spring for those summer positions as well. Yes.
So I got here a little late, and this is what you were talking about when I came in. So you may have already answered it, but when a job posting says like, master's degree plus 4 years of experience, bachelor's degree plus 4 years of experience, and we here have PhD, maybe some summer internship experience, but not 4 years of working in industry experience. Is that like commonly accepted that PhD that takes 4 years is equivalent to 4 years of work experience, or does that differ from company to company? What's your take?
Yeah, that's a great question. It honestly differs from company to company. Companies that hire a lot of scientists or people that have scientific backgrounds, a lot of times they are going to count that dissertating period or that period where you're working in a laboratory with a PI as your work experience. A lot of times in those cases, if they're looking for quote unquote industry experience, it'll be explicitly stated within the job listing. So I'll use an example is principal scientist, which is kind of different than a principal investigator in academia, but still the same kind of ideas. They oversee research. Usually a principal scientist requires quote unquote industry experience. Even if you've done a postdoc, it's very rare you're going to walk straight out of a postdoc into a principal scientist role in industry. But say like assistant scientist, associate scientist, scientist 1, 2, 3, a lot of times that will be counted if you wrote, if you spent time in the lab doing research, or writing a thesis, or writing a dissertation, that will be counted towards your years of experience. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
Do you think that being a little more wordy and descriptive is better, like the job description?
Yeah, so again, it's one of those things where it really depends. One thing that I'd recommend when it comes to conciseness, you still want that information to be packed in the bullet point, but there's a lot of times where you can make it more concise. Articles can usually be removed, and take those out. That will make it more concise. You can often take numbers and make those shorter, so you don't have to write out 300,000. You can write 300K. So those are different ways you can make it more concise. As a general rule of thumb, try to keep the bullet point 2 lines. Now, some of those examples we looked were like 4 lines, but that's just because they were on a PowerPoint and they weren't like really on a resume. But try to keep them 2 lines. Maybe your top bullet point can be 3 lines that kind of fleshes out a little bit of the project that you've done or the work that you've been doing. Yes.
Mm. So positions ask us either resume or CV. So what conditions we should consider whether we should submit resume or CV? How do we and what would be emphasized?
Yeah, for a lot of the times, the positions they're asking for both. I would recommend if you're going to upload a CV that you also include some resume-like elements on those. It's a little bit different than if you're applying to an academic position that's really going to emphasize things like your grants and your publications and your teaching experiences. So at the end of the day, you want to upload the document that best communicates your qualification for the role. So if it's something that's going to be, say, at a national lab, for example, a lot of times publications that you've done or the particular niche area that you've worked in within your research might be fairly important. So a CV, like I said, with maybe some resume type of elements, may be the best vehicle that you use for that. If it's an R&D position, for example, an industry or data science position, a lot of times the resume is probably going to emphasize your skills much better in that kind of context.
If not, please thank the speaker again.
Yeah, you bet.